All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Hack.py. This is a 7-part Python workshop series where we're going to be exploring a bunch of different topics in Python, such as web scraping, introduction to Python, web development, and data science concepts as well. So this is our first workshop. We're just going to be going over the introduction to Python. So if you've never used Python before, or if you have and you'd like a little bit of a review, we're going to be going over the basics of Python and some of the cool Python 3 features that were recently introduced. So today our two presenters are Maggie and Henry. And if you guys want to introduce yourselves, go ahead.
Henry, you can go first.
Oh, okay. Hi. So I'm Henry. I'm a third-year computer science major with a minor in cognitive science. Some of you might recognize me because I'm a tutor for CSE 15L. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. Maggie?
Okay, so my name is Maggie. I'm a third-year computer science major with a minor in mathematics. So that's basically it about me.
And then I forgot to introduce myself as well. My name is David. I'm a third-year computer science major, Hack.py director, and I'm also like a CSE tutor. So yeah, with that all said and done, I think we can get started.
So this workshop, if you want the slides, it's acnurl.com/hackpy1. If on the repo, here's this link. And so I guess we can start talking about what is Python because, well, our workshop talks about Python. And Python is a high-level programming language, which means that it's very close to human language as versus computer language, which makes it very easy to code and easy to understand. And it has a very wide spectrum of functionalities, and it can be used in machine learning, software development, data science, and a lot more things. So it's really a great tool because not only is it simple to learn, but it also have a very wide spectrum of applications, and it's definitely a very good skill to add to your resume. Companies will like this. So, okay, well, I guess we can just jump right in and start writing our very first Python program. So I'm gonna start by opening my Python IDE and just showcasing the code. Okay, it'll take a while. So yeah, if you're a programmer, a lot of people have Hello World as their first program. So here I have the Python shell, which should come with the Python installation. And basically over here, we can just type commands and have the computer run it. So how we do Hello World in Python is literally print Hello World, simple enough. Print, oh, that is not good. Print Hello World. So yeah, the computer printed the sentence Hello World to us, which is basically what we want. And there's our first Python program. And it is very simple compared to other languages that are potentially faster to run, but it's more complex. It will be more complex to code. So Python is the way to go. So okay, but Hello World is a very simple example, but more often than not, in programming, we will have interactions with these data and these values to do various things. And we can refer to these data, these values, using this thing called variables. So variables are basically locations in memory that are used to store data. For example, we have this line of code over here. It says age is equal to 23, which what this code does is it says to store the value 23 in the variable that's called age. So if we refer to the variable age in anywhere in the program, we will grab the value that it stores. And so if we print age now, it will print the value 23 to the console. So you might have noticed that we have these parts in pink over here. These are called comments in Python. And comments are basically parts of the code that's not meant to be read by computers, but meant to be read by humans. And they will not be part of the computer program execution. And the reason why you might need to have comments in your code is because mostly when you're programming, you will be working in teams, and comments will help your teammates understand what your code is doing. And in Python, if you want to enter a comment, just type a hashtag, a pound sign, a sharp, whatever you call that, and the rest of the line will be comments. And so in the comments, I said this is a string and this is an int, but what exactly is a string and what exactly is an int, which leads us to data types. So in most programming languages, your variables have types. And so some of the most basic types are int, which is an integer value within the range -2 to the 31st to +2 to the 31st minus 1 inclusive. The reason why it has to be in this range is because an integer has a 4-byte storage, and it does not have value. It does not have space to store values out of this range. So for example, have 0, -1, and everything else like this. So whole numbers are basically ints. And other than int, we have floats, which are basically decimal values that has the same range as integers. And notice that even though -3.0 is technically a whole number, because of the 0.0, it makes it a float. So -3 is going to be an int, but -3.0 is a float, all because of that decimal sign. So next up, we have string, which is a sequence of characters that can represent any text. And we use single or double quotes to wrap around the text and to tell the computer that we are using a string. So for example, we have this text 1, 2, 3 over here, which if we do not have the double quotes wrapping around it, will be interpreted as an int. But with the double quotes around it, it now has the type string, and it is a string that says 1, 2, 3, the text 1, 2, 3. And Boolean is a binary value that can be either true or false. So think of it as a truth value to store whether or not something is currently true. So for example, if we want to have a variable that stores whether or not this person is currently in San Diego, it will be either true, which this person is, and false, if this person is not. So, and please notice that in Python, the truth values are true and false, but with the capitalized T. If you have lowercase, I don't think that's going to work. Any questions up until this point? Let me check the chat.
Oh yeah, real quick. We forgot to say it earlier, but sign in to check in with the check-in code PyHacks on where do you go again? At members.acmucnc.com. Yeah.
Let me type the link in the chat. Members.acmucnc. But any questions, or I'm gonna move on. Are there long or double data types? I think long int and int are basically the same type in Python, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone? All right. All right, okay. So moving on from data types. So now that we have our variables and their respective types, we can talk about operators where we can manipulate and access our data. So we have a lot of operators in Python, but we're just gonna cover some of the major ones. That includes assignment operators, comparison operators, arithmetic operators, and logical operators. So starting with the assignment operators, we already did age equals to 23 earlier, which assigns the values to variables. And these weird things, plus equals or minus equals, basically either adds or subtracts the current value by the first variable by the second value. So if we have age plus equals to 1, it will add 1 to the current value that the variable age holds. For example, if we have age equals to 23 and age plus 1, and right now age is going to be 24 after. Next up, we have comparison operators. So these operators, they return a Boolean value. And if we want to check if two things are equal, we use double equals instead of single equal because single equal is already assignment. So examples over here are 9 equals to 10 is false, and 6 is smaller than 21 is true, and 3 is bigger or equal to 3 is also true, which makes sense. And there are arithmetic operators, which basically adds, subtracts, multiplies, divides, or mods the first value by the second value. And the add operator in particular can be used on strings to concatenate the second string to the first string. So for example, if we have 3 plus 3, we'll get 6. And we can concatenate CSC and 11 to get CSC 11. And 5 divided by 3 is actually going to be 1 instead of 1 point something because 5 and 3 are both integer types, and in Python, that means that the result will also be an integer type. If we have 5.0 divided by 3, though, the result will be 1.67. Okay, my math is scuffed over here. And lastly, we have our logical operators, and they are going to be used on bool values and the return a bool value. So and an or, they will both be operating on two truth values. The AND operator returns true if both values are true and returns false otherwise. And the OR operator will return true if at least one of the values are true and false otherwise. And the not operator just will return the opposite of the original value. So not true is false and not false is true. So these are basically the operators. And we have a pop quiz now. And I will give you all 1 minute to think about these questions, and feel free to drop these questions in chat. And yeah. Also, if you have questions, drop them in chat as well. Python 3 to float division by. Let's try it out, okay? I'm gonna try print 5 divided by 3 on my console. Oh, okay. So integer divisions actually do give these values in Python. So yeah, so that's one thing that's different than most programming languages, and thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so the answers are already here. So x, for the first question, we have x is equal to 3, and x minus is equal to 2, means subtract 2 from the current value of x, which leaves 1. And if y is equal to 9 and y is equals to y divided by 2, and print y, we'll get 4.5 because 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. And the last one might be a little tricky because it involves a lot of like logic Boolean values. But so what we do is we first evaluate what's inside the braces. And so 3 is smaller than 2 is already false. And because and only returns true if both statements are true, this thing over here is gonna be false. And not false is gonna be true. So Z has the value of true. Okay, enough for pop quizzes. Any questions up to this point? Yeah, there's participation credit. Just use your iClickers to click. Batteries. Okay. So, well, we have our operators, which can be used on different data types, and we can also cast our data into different types. So what we do is we use typecasting functions, and basically what typecasting function is, it will cast that data of one value into the other. And so int will return an integer value based on the argument if possible. So int1, int with string 1, it will return 1. It passes the string, so it gives you the number 1. And int 2.3, it will round 2.3 to the whole number 2. And int of false will return 0 because false is 0 as an int. And similarly, float, string, boolean, they are all casting methods, and they will return a float, a string, or a boolean of that argument inside of it if possible. All right. So not only can we manipulate with our declared, pre-declared data in our program, we can also take inputs and outputs from our users. And we already introduced our Hello World program in our first example. And in Hello World, we are using the function print, and it takes in an argument, and which the argument will be the text that's printed to the console. So print Hello World will essentially print Hello World to the console. And we can also ask for users' input using an argument, and it has a return value, which is the user's input after this. So argument is optional, but this argument will be printed while we are waiting for the user's input. Yeah, so it takes the internal value, so it doesn't use any arguments from the script. And the value returned from input is also always a string value, which is very important because if we want the user to enter a number, we will need to cast the string into a number. And if you want the input to be stored as another data type, you need to cast it. So basically what I just said. So here's an example. So on the first line, we have name equals to input, hi, what's your name? Which will print, hi, what's your name? And wait for the user's input. And if I enter the name Maggie, which is a string, it will print, Maggie, do you like to code? And print yes or no, which basically just prints this sentence onto the console, and the response will be equal to input. Notice that input does not have an argument over here, which means that we'll have nothing printed before we ask the user to input anything. So it will just be enter yes or no, and then we wait for the user's input. And we'll talk about this soon, but if response is yes, then we can print, hey, I like to code too. Otherwise, we can print, but coding is fun. Any questions up to this point? Speed running my G's? Yeah, speed run. Right. Looks like we're good to move on. So we're already talked about casting methods, and actually they are part of the Python's built-in functions. So other than casting data types, we can have our math functions, our Boolean logic any, basically returns if any of the Boolean values is true, and all if all is true, and a range function, an enum function, a zip function. Python is a very powerful language, okay? So for the complete list of functions, please see the official Python documentation, link included on this slide. It is a whole world for you to explore, okay? So, and well, sometimes Python does not have, like, sometimes we want some functionalities that is not already included in Python by default. That's where we have library functions. And Python, it has libraries of pre-implemented functions for us to use. And we can use these functions to do many powerful things such as sort a list or get a random number, etc. And here's a link to the Python standard library. And in order to tell the computer that we are using a library, we need to import a library. And how we do this is simply by putting the import statements at the beginning of the program. And its syntax goes like, oh, if we want to import the random library, we do import random, and random is the name of the library. So import followed by the name of the library. And if we want to use a library function, we can use the library name dot function name followed by its parameters. So for example, random.randint 05. So we can tell that it's from the random function because is random dot. So it calls the randint method from the random library with the argument 0 and 5. So it return 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or yeah. If you have any questions at any point, just please feel free to drop in. All right. I'm gonna wait for questions before we actually move on to the coding part.
Yeah, we know this is like a lot of information at once. So if any of you guys have a question about anything, like feel free to ask and we'd be happy to help you out.
I'll wait for like a minute for questions. Okay, right? So hopefully you're already signed up for a Replit account because we will need it for this part. This part exercise. I need to exit the presentation. Come on, okay. So the link over here, please open it in your browser. Basically what Replit is it's a platform where you can basically share code and fork the code that someone else already has to make changes to it. And you can run code of different languages all on this page. So it's really cool. So over here, if you follow this link, you will see a Replit by David, which we're doing a random number guesser this time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a program that lets the user guess a number that's randomly chosen by the computer. And I will give you guys like half a minute to get on this page.
Yeah, so also we're gonna separate everyone into rooms on Discord. So I want to give everyone like 5 minutes to figure this out. You should be able to apply a lot of the knowledge we talked about in what Maggie was just talking about before. So if you haven't joined our Discord already, one of us can link that in the chat. But we'll just separate into rooms and you'll be able to ask any of us questions if you get stuck on anything. And also only code up to the first half. So there's a comment that says end of the first part and start of the second part. Just go up to there. And then once you finish, we'll come back. Maggie will walk you through exactly what we're doing. And then we'll keep going from there.
Also really quick. So how you create a copy of the code is you just press fork and it should do the trick for you. So the fork button over here. All right, I think we're good to start coding on Discord.
Yeah, so if the board members could each join a room, and then if you guys want any help with this, feel free to just hop in a room and ask us any questions.
So let me share my screen again to demonstrate and have a little walkthrough of the code that we just had. So the first thing up that we have is importing the random library, which we have talked about the syntax for importing. Just import followed by the name of this library called random. And for variable assignment, we want the user to have 8 chances to guess, which means we are assigning the value 8 to chances. And upper bound can really be whatever you choose it to be. It can be 100, 200, even like 10,000 if you want, as long as it's within the range of 0 to positive 2 to the positive 31st minus 1. And I'm gonna just say 100 in this case, so it's not too insane. And so we have already talked about rand range on our slides. So just to go over again, this line of code is calling the range function from the random library and storing the result in a variable called answer. And if you go to the Python standard library, it can take in 2 or less arguments. So Well, if we want it to be a random number between 0 and upper bound, we can just use 0 and upper bound. And this upper bound will have the value of whatever value that we stored in here. So we're basically accessing the value 100 with the variable name over here on this line. And print the sentence, make a guess about the number. So remember, when we print, we need to be printing a string. So we need double quotes. And so just print, make a guess about the number, and you will have, so this line, it prints the sentence, this number is between 0 and whatever, and the second value should be a string, but upper bound is currently a variable of type int. So what do we need to do? We can use the typecasting method string upper bound to convert the upper bound into a string. So we can concatenate the number is an integer between 0 and this string. And okay, we need to initialize the response with user's input. And how we get the user's input is we use our input method. And since we already prompted the user to make a guess about a number, we do not need to pass in any arguments to the input function. But if we want to print anything before we ask the user for the input, we can have print something here. It just prints a sentence, not a big difference. So right now, the user's input will be stored in a variable called response in the form of a string, which means we will need to cast the response into an integer. And what we do is we just pass in a response to the typecasting method integer, which will make guess in int. So if we try to run our code, hopefully there's no mistake. So yeah, it prints the correct sentences. It tells us to make a guess about the number. The number is an integer between 0 and 100. And it should take my input and initialize it as, yeah, it's taking my input. So the program terminated for now because we still have a huge chunk of code to finish. But at the end of that program, the guess variable should have the value 20, integer. Okay, so that will wrap up the first part of our exercise. And now Henry is gonna take over for the second part.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick. All right. Can you all see the slides okay? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides. Cool. All right. So yeah, now that we've talked about how you can get like inputs and as well as some of the basics about Python, we're going to start going into some of more of the logic that you can do within Python. So one of the important things that you can do in Python, and this is true for mainly most programming languages, is you can do what are known as conditionals. So the first important thing that we need to know is that you can have these things called if statements. And these will basically execute lines of code if the current statement is satisfied. You also have things called elif statements, which is short for else if. And these will basically execute lines of code if the previous conditions haven't been met, but the current condition has been met. So if, say, it doesn't meet the requirement that the number is greater than 10, but it does meet the requirement that it's greater than 8, then here it will print out the line x is between 8 and 10. Lastly, we also have else statements, and these are basically conditions that if all else fails, then you just print the remaining lines of code. And so yeah, one thing you want to note about if statements, elif statements, and else statements is that in Python, unlike languages like JavaScript or like Java, Python actually blocks out the code using indentation rather than curly braces. So here you would write out your statements followed by a colon, and then the next line and all previous lines or all following lines for that if condition, you'd want to tab one space just to make sure that those lines actually get executed. So over here, you can see that I've basically have this outlined in its own function in PyCharm. So right now, x is being set to 9. And so if we were to run this code, what do you think would happen if we were to run this code? What do you think would get printed out to the terminal? I'll go ahead and open chat. Yeah, so if we were to run this code, so we'll go ahead and click the run button over here. So x equals 9. We're going to run this code, and it'll print out x's between 8 and 10. Because how this works is that we basically check if x is greater than 10. Since the value of x is 9, it's not greater than 10, so we move on to the next condition. So then here we check if x is greater than 8. And since 9 is greater than 8, then we would print out x's between 8 and 10. And then this would also follow, say, if we had, say, a number like 5. So if we set x equals to 5, it would run through x is greater than 10. It's not greater than 10. It runs through x is greater than 8. It's not greater than 8. And then we run x is greater than 6. It's not greater than 6. So else we just print out x is no greater than 6. So if we run this code and just check to make sure, right here we get that x is no greater than 6. So that's mainly the logic behind if statements, elif statements, and else statements. So now we can move on to something a little bit more complicated. So another thing that you can do in Python and many other languages are what are known as loops. And so these loops are basically a box of code that you can use to basically execute a certain selection of code multiple times. So the first thing you want to know about for loops is that this for loop basically iterates over the items of any sequence. You could have, say, an array or a list, or maybe even a string, in the order that they appear within the sequence. So take this line of code right here. So for index in range 1 through 10 with a step of 1, this will basically run the code basically from 1 all the way up until 9. Because in Python, for this particular range function, the start is inclusive, but then the end number is exclusive. So it would not run for 10. And then this one here is basically just telling you what step we're doing for each iteration. So for this loop, we would basically be incrementing by 1 each time. If we were to change this to 2, then it would basically run every 2 numbers. So it'd go like 1, 3, 5, and so on and so forth. While loop is kind of similar, but instead of defining like a set range, you're basically going to be keeping track of a certain condition is being met. So for example, in this line right here, while 9 plus 10 is equal to 21, will run for as long as that condition is true, which in this case, 9 plus 10 unfortunately does not equal 21. So it would immediately just skip over that loop. But yeah, besides that, there are also a couple of keywords that you should know when it comes to loops. So the break keyword is basically whenever you put this into a loop and it executes, it basically stops the execution of the entire loop, and it will just exit the loop and continue on with any code that's outside of the loop. It will not continue looping. Whereas the continue statement, it basically stops the execution of the current loop, but it will just go on to the next loop instead of just stopping completely. So basically, you just want to think of break as like braking a car. It just stops completely. While continuing, you're just pausing for a second. Well, not pausing, but you're just basically skipping any of the code within the current iteration. So here we have some more code that we can execute. So I'll go ahead and just comment out this code up here. These are also another way of just commenting out large blocks of code. So here, what I can do is I can uncomment these 2 loops right here. So the first loop that we have right here is a for loop that will basically print out the numbers 1 through 9. So here, we're basically taking the index. We're going to iterate from 1 all the way up until 10 exclusive, and we're going to basically print that number. This while loop will basically do the same thing, except we're doing it in while loop now. So we're basically just checking that number is less than 10. And every time during the iteration, we're going to update num by 1. So if we were to run this code, you'll basically see here that we basically iterate through the loop two times, one for the for loop and then one for the while loop. So as you can see here, it just prints out 1 through 9 for this for loop right here, and then it prints it again for the while loop. So I see some messages in chat, so I'll go ahead and open those up real quick. If my chat will open, let's see if this works. Okay. Thank you, David. Okay. Anyways, continuing on. Get it? Continue. So anyways, next thing we can talk about is, so we can do a couple more examples of loops. So in the chat, I'd like you to tell me what you think that this code right here would output. Any takers in chat want to guess as to what this section of code right here will output? Yep. Yeah. So basically this line of code, or this loop right here, will basically print out basically all the numbers from 0 up to 10 exclusive by steps of 2. So if we were to run this in our code right here, so we have 0, 10, and 2. And if we were to run that, what we would get is basically, yeah, so we'd run through the code from 0 up to 10 and basically print out 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. And so moving on to the next example. So now we have a bit more complicated code. We now have a while loop. So first we're going to set y equals to 10. And so basically what we're going to check is that while y is not equal to 0, we're basically going to want to use this modulus operator. And what this modulus operator does, it basically takes whatever y divided by 2, and it basically returns the remainder of that. So whatever the remainder of y divided by 2 is, that's what it's going to be. And we're basically going to check whether or not that is 0. And if it works, then we print out y. Otherwise, we just continue on and decrement y by 1. So any takers as to what this code will do? Trying to open up chat again, but Zoom is being funky. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, basically what this code will do, it'll start at 10. And basically every time we go through the loop, we basically want to check if if y divided by 2 is equal to 0, which basically is checking if it's an even number. And if not, if it does, then we'll print it out. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. So basically how it works is we'll go through, say, 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. There's no remainder. So we print out 10. Then we decrement y by 1. So we go to the next iteration, which is 9. 9 does not divide by 2 evenly, so there will be a remainder. So we wouldn't print out 9. And then we would just continue going on forward. So just to make sure that this actually does run, what we can do is basically change this condition right here to basically if num does not equal 0, then we want to check if num mod 2 is equal to 0. And if it is, we want to print out num. Otherwise, we want to do num equals num minus 1. And so if we were to run this code, then as you can see right here, yep, it goes from 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And so yeah, moving on, what we can do next is we can go into a bit of syntactical sparkles that we can do with Python. So we here on the left side, we have this if-else block right here, right? So here we're going to set num equal to 5. And we're basically going to check if num is equal to 5. And if it is, then we would set x equal to 5. Otherwise, we would set x equal to 0. Now, we can do this, But a much faster way and much shorter way of doing this that we can actually compact it into a more, I guess, horizontal way is that we can use what are known as ternary operators. And so here, rather than having this whole like 4 lines, we can actually combine it into 1 line. So the way I like to think about it is you're kind of squishing these 2 resulting lines of code outside of the if statement. So here we're basically doing, we're setting x equal to 5 if number word is equal to 5, else we just set it to 0. And that's how ternary operators work. And so basically, we can go a little more in depth about it. Also, see you later, David. And so, yeah, so we can talk a little bit more about ternary operators. So here is basically the sort of basic syntax of it. So basically, you would have whatever happens on true if the condition is true. Otherwise, you would execute whatever happens when the condition is false. So as in the previous example, we have x equals 5 if number word is equal to 5, else the condition where number word does not equal 5, we would set it to 0. And so for this kind of ternary operator use, it's really best to only use it with only 2 possible outcomes. Any more than 2, it gets a little complicated. It will work, but there is a reason why it's called ternary operator, and that's because you only want to use at most like 3 different terms, 2 for the different things that should happen between true and false, and then 1 for the condition. So otherwise, if you do use more than 2 possible outcomes, it's just going to become really messy. So in a case like this, where you have like a lot of different conditions, what you would want to do is just to continue using just like the simple like if, elif, else kind of block. And yeah. And then, so that was something that we could do with if else statements. There's also another thing that we can do with loops. So here on the left side, we have, we're basically having a list of numbers, 1, 3, 5, and 7, and we're assigning that to this nums variable. And then we have another variable for which for now, we're just going to have it set to an empty list. And that's going to be called num squared. And so what we want to do is basically for each of the numbers in nums, we basically want to check if that number, we're basically going to square each of the numbers in nums and then basically add that to our num squared array. So here, we're going to go through each I in nums. So that would be 1, 3, 5, and 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to add that. So basically append that to num squared, the value of I squared 2. So yeah, this operator right here, where you have the 2 asterisks, that basically means you're going to multiply it twice. And so this would be basically I squared. So once we run through this loop and once we print out num squared, what we're going to get is the square of each number in nums, which is going to be 1, 9, 25, and 49. So that's one way we could do it. That way we could do it with this sort of like loop where we'd have this like condition for what we wanted to do. But an easier, well, maybe not slightly easier, but also just, I guess, cleaner in general, is that we can use what is known as list comprehension. And this is basically a more, I guess, cleaner way of actually writing a for loop that only has like, say, like a simple operation that you're doing on a particular array. So here we have our same nums array. So that's going to be 1, 3, 5, 7. But instead, what we're going to be doing, as you can see, like there are similarities between these 2 pieces of code. Here, what we're going to do is we're basically going to do I squared for each I in nums. And that's basically going to create a new list that's assigned to num squared that basically contains this I squared value for each of the nums, for each of the number in nums. So this would also result in 1, 9, 25, 49. So Jonathan is asking, is I an arbitrary value? Can it be any letter or does it have to be I? So yeah, this is an arbitrary value or variable. You can use whatever variable name you would like for this sort of like list comprehension thing, or I guess in general. Yeah, so it can be whatever you want. Just for the sake of this example, we're using I, but if you wanted it to be, say, like number or like t, or like whatever you want. You can basically just use that. But for this example, we just decided to use I. So yeah, going a little bit more in depth about the actual syntax itself. So basically the format is whatever expression you want to apply for each item in the list that you're trying to go through. And if you want, you can also add a conditional. And this conditional, as we've mentioned before, is basically just some conditional that we check to see whether or not it's true. But this if statement right here, this part isn't necessary for the actual list comprehension itself. This if conditional part is optional. But yeah, so one of the reasons why we would want to use list comprehension instead of say maybe like a for loop, it's basically just a great way for performing quick operations, or say if you want to filter a list, and it's pretty commonly used. But in general, this is I'd say one of the main reasons why you'd want to use list comprehension. So here we're actually going to put that into practice in terms of like filtering. So here we have a numbers array that has 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we want to basically square each number. So that's just going to be what we did before, where we did I squared for I in nums. And so that would result in 1, 4, 9, and 16. But what happens if, say, we wanted to basically create an array of numbers that basically took all the numbers in nums, which were odd, and then add 0.5 to it. So in this way, we could actually use list comprehension in order to do that. It's actually a lot cleaner than if we were to put an if condition within our for loop. So what we can do instead of this I squared thing is what we can do is we can have our expression, which will be I plus 0.5. And then we're basically going to do that for each of the numbers, or for each I in nums, if I mod 2 is equal to 1. So this will basically check if the whichever number we look at in nums divided by 2 has a remainder of 1. And that usually means that it's an odd number. So here, if we were to do 1 mod 2, we get a remainder of 1. So since that condition is satisfied, what we would do is 1 plus 0.5, and we'd store that into our odds plus 1 array. So here we would get the value of 1.5. Next value 2. 2 mod 2 does not equal 1, so we wouldn't put that number into odds plus 1. So we'd go on to the next iteration. And so we'd go on to 3. Since that's odd, we would add 0.5 to it, and we'd basically put that into odds plus 1. So at the end of it, once this line of code is executed, we'd basically end up with an array that has only 1.5 and 3.5. Does that make sense to everyone so far? Okay, I will take that silence as a yes. And then last thing we wanted to cover, this is something that might come up in your time using Python, but it's fairly something, it's something that's neat to know, is you can do what's known as string formatting. So basically what this means is that you can actually print out a string using the value of a variable. So here, in terms of like old style string formatting, you can have a variable, say, called name equals Bob. And the way that you would basically input this variable into, say, a string that you want to print out is you can use what's known as like this sort of like string formatter, which is this like parentheses s, or sorry, %s. And basically after that, you would basically append this sort of %name in order to notify the program that you want to input this name value into where %s is right now. And so if you were to print this, it would basically print out hello Bob. Another way you could do this is instead of using like this % value, is you can just use these curly braces. And then afterwards, you would add this call to the format function and pass in this name value. So this would also print out hello Bob. But one of the things about Python that you can do is there are these things called f strings. And these are basically just a shorter way of doing all of this in terms of like having to set a or having to basically type out this entire line, as well as like this extra, stuff at the end. So instead, what you can do is you can just type out an f followed by a string such as hello, and then in parentheses you would just type in whatever value you want to pass into it. And this is much simpler and a lot cleaner. So this is something that you can also do. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next coding parts where we will be continuing making our random number generator, random number guesser. So head back to the REPL that we were working on a couple minutes ago, and we'll also be going back to Discord in order to answer any questions. So we'll give you around, I'd say like 10 minutes for this part, I think. And then afterwards we'll come back and I'll code this for you all live. But yeah, as of now, we're going to head back into the Discord, and then we will be going around the various voice channels just to check up if y'all have any questions. So yeah. And again, so I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Cool. So now you should be able to see my screen for the REPL. Maggie, could you give me a thumbs up on that?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Cool. All right. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and live code this. So the last part we left off at was basically just extracting from the user our response and then storing that into a guess variable. So now we're going to keep going and we're going to use some of the stuff that we learned in the later part of the workshop to actually implement the rest of the random number guesser. So here, what we want to do is we basically want to repeat until our guess is equal to the answer. So the way we're going to do that is we're basically going to check while guess is not, and then also don't forget to uncomment the code. So basically what we're going to check is while guess is not equal to answer. Unexpected indents. Oh, right. Cool. So yeah, we're basically going to be checking while guess is not equal to answer. And so for every time that guess is not equal to answer, what we're going to want to do is we're basically going to want to check, or we're basically going to want to decrement chances by 1 every time. So the way we're going to do that is just going to decrement chances by 1. And so if we don't have any guesses left, we basically want to tell the user that they're out of chances and then show the answer. And so the way that we're going to do that, we're basically going to uncomment this line right here. And we're basically going to check if chances is equal to 0. And if it is, what we want to do is we're going to basically print, you didn't manage to get the right answer. And then as well as print that the correct number is whatever the answer was. And then we want to make sure that we typecast that to a string so that we have this sort of like string concatenation correctly. And then afterwards, once we print out those two statements, we're going to want to break out of this loop so that once our chances get to 0, we basically stop this loop and exit the program. And so otherwise, we basically want to check if the guess is smaller than the answer. We want to print something telling the user to enter a bigger number. And so for this, we're going to use another if statement. So we're basically going to check if guess is smaller than answer. We're basically going to say, we're basically going to print out something along the lines of, guess is smaller than answer. And then after that, what we're going to want to do is we can basically just print out another line saying the answer is bigger than, is bigger than, and then convert guess to a string. Otherwise, we want to also check if guess is greater than, sorry, this is a typo. If guess is bigger than the answer. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to write an elif statement for that. So if the guess is not smaller than the answer, then we want to check if guess is bigger than the answer. And in that situation, we're basically going to write another print statement, except this time what we can do is we can just type out, say, the answer is smaller than, and then plus the value of guess as a string. And yeah, so once we do that, what we want to do is we basically want to ask the user to enter a new response. So the way that we're going to do that is basically just repeat what we did up here. Where we're basically going to ask the user for an input. So we're just going to do that again. So what we're going to do is we're going to do inputs. And this time we can actually say, as an argument to input, we can pass in the string saying, oh, guess again. And what we can do is basically just say, have these like parentheses saying that you have this many chances left. So the way we're going to do that is basically just have this sort of string concatenation thing where the result of this is basically going to be some string like guess again, say like 3 chances left. That's what this is going to output to the user. And so once we do that, we're going to also want to reset guess to whatever respawn is now set to. So the way we're going to do that is just set guess to response as this integer value. And so that is basically going to be the end of our while loop. So that's just going to keep running until the user gets the answer or doesn't get the answer. And in the case that we do get the answer, we basically want to congratulate them. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the ternary operator that we talked about earlier. And so basically, we basically want to print out something like, congrats, you got the right answer. And that will be if guess is equal to answer. Otherwise, we're going to say, we're basically going to say something like, whoops, you did, we can just say something like, whoops, you didn't get the right answer. And then that is basically it. And then afterwards, we can basically just say, we can basically just print out the value of whatever the answer was. And then we can just do that with another string saying like the answer is, and then just append the value of whatever answer was. And yeah, this is a little bit of the repeats of what we did here for if chance is equal to 0. But that's okay. You can change this as much as you want. You can customize this to whatever you want your sort of like little random number guesser to be. But for the case of this, it's fine if we can just leave it like this. We just want to basically put into practice what we did with the ternary operator. So if we were to basically run this program right now, so now we're going to make a guess between 0 and 10. So say we put in 3 and press enter. So the answer is smaller than 3. I forgot a space over here, but I can adjust that later. So now we guess again. So say we can guess the answer is smaller than 3, so we can guess 2. And yeah, so we get the right answer. And that's the case. What we can also try this with something bigger. Say, let's try 100 and we have 3 chances. Let's try that. So if you run this program, so it's an integer between 0 and 100. So what you can do, let's type in 50. So the answer is smaller than 50. So let's say 25. The answer is smaller than 25. So let's say 12. And yeah, you didn't manage to get the right answer. The correct number is 11. And then we also print out the statements at the end where it's, oops, you didn't get the right answer. The answer is 11. And yeah, so once you completed this program, you basically have a functioning random number guesser. So feel free to play with it, play around with it if you like. But otherwise, yeah, so we're nearing the end of our workshop. So here are additional resources that you can take a look at if you want to basically get a head start on some of the other Python stuff we'll be doing this quarter during our Hack.py series. Dev Hints is a good website to take a look at different Python documentation. Same thing with wormpython.org. The official Python docs is a really good resource as well, in case you want to see like any of the functions and like what they take in. And then same thing with program is. These are all great resources, highly recommend if you want to learn more about Python. But yeah, that basically wraps up our workshop for today. So thanks for coming, and then come back next week for part 2, where we'll also be doing the part 2 of our introduction to Python. And then after next week's workshop, we'll go more into the different types of applications that we can use Python for. But yeah, stay tuned for that. The slides for next week's workshop will be posted at acmurl.com/hackpy2. And
wait, Henry, go on. Can you go to the next slide? There's like, I added some more slides because I added a thing. You might have to refresh.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Yes, I can do that.
After that, okay. Yes, we have a feedback form, acmurl.com/hackpy-feedback. So let us know how you felt about this workshop. We're willing to take. We want to hear what we did good. We want to hear what y'all would like to see more of. So definitely leave your feedback there. And then go to the next slide. Okay, and then one more thing. So ACM Hack this quarter, we're doing our own project system called Hack Projects. Event code is at the beginning of the slides. What is it? Pi hacks or something? If you go to the slides, it's the very first slide. But anyways, ACM Hack is doing our own project system that's loosely inspired from Google Computer Science Summer Institute. Basically, this quarter we're going to be we're going to be assembling teams of 3, and each team is going to basically develop their own web application using the MERN stack, which is MongoDB, Express.js, React.js, and Node.js. And so we're very geared towards beginners. And so if you are interested and would like to apply, fill out our application at hack-projects. These apps will be closing next Wednesday, I believe. So if you're interested at all, definitely indicate your interest. And then let us know if you have any questions. But yeah, that's basically it.
But yeah, thanks for coming, y'all. Hope you all enjoyed. We'll be sticking around for a couple of more minutes to answer questions.
Yeah, someone said if someone applied to ACM Sci Projects, would we potentially get involved in ACM Hack Projects? Yeah, so go ahead if you're interested. So ACM Hack Projects is meant to be like a stepping stone towards side projects. So definitely you'll get in one or the other. But definitely if you already applied to side projects, apply to ours as well. And we'll look at your app and stuff. But it's one or the other, like it's not both. Yeah, and we're collaborating with side projects as well. So we'll put you in one or the other, basically. Yeah. I can get the slides, acmurl.com/hackpy1. And yes, workshop next week will be the same time and link. Yeah, ACM. So all our workshops are acmurl.com/hack. So you can go to this Zoom link. And yeah, just if you're on our Discord, we're always like posting announcements and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to do just play some game? Well, there's not many people here, but
There's like 6 people because there are 7 people because there's 2 me's.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, everyone else left earlier.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. Are y'all down to play a round of Scribble or something?
I am down.
Okay,
I'm down too.
Yeah, I know you, Henry. I know you're down. Anyone else down? Did these
We
get
should
crushed as well?
probably stop the recording though. So
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.